Ok, guys, e agora eu suponho que vai dar tudo certo. Eu tentei pelo aplicativo, um dos aplicativos oficiais do Facebook, a postar essa live, mas não deu certo e suponho que agora dê certo. O assunto dessa noite é discriminação. Oh, estamos eu e o Robert live, ele está live agora nesse exato momento que eu estou falando aqui com vocês e em alguns instantes... ele já entrou, vou chamar ele agora. Ok, bring Robert. 3, 2, 1 e adicionando. 3, 2, 1 e... Agora vai, hein? Adicionando. Minha internet está um pouquinho lenta, mas vai, hein? Semana passada deu certo. Essa semana também. Hello, Rob! There you are,
Hey,
man!
how's it going?
Perdão. Mil desculpas. Eu testei um aplicativo novo do próprio Facebook, ok? Para poder te chamar nessa chamada, mas aparentemente não funcionou. Mas eu vou tentar novamente, eu farei outros testes, ok? Tudo bem com você hoje?
Okay. Sure. Yeah.
Nice.
So.
Nice. Agora já estamos ao vivo, ok?
Great.
Você trabalhou hoje?
I did. You know, not much.
Não muito, mas você trabalhou.
Doing a little bit of work.
Ok.
Yeah, not much,
tá com a cabeça descansada?
No, actually, I'm not tired at all. I spent all day I didn't work today, like a whole day of work. I did a few things in the evening, that's all.
Ok. So, acordou tarde?
Yeah, I got up way late, yes.
Eu acordei cedo, mas eu normalmente durmo muito pouco. Eu durmo uma média de 6 horas. Esse sou eu. Ok?
Ok. Well, I slept like 10, so...
tá bom. Tá um bom horário. Yeah. Bom, Rob, estamos ao vivo agora, está tudo ok? Estamos conectados. Essa aqui, essa vai ficar, ok? Essa live vai ficar. E hoje...
This is the one that's watched.
E hoje nós discutiremos um assunto bem complicado. Perdão por escolher esse tema. O assunto seria discriminação.
Okay, so Yudi says he's sorry that he chose this, and I'm actually happy that he did, because this is one topic that I never shy away from. I have a lot of experience in my own life and dealing with what is called discrimination, and also, you know, everything tied into that. We are going to be talking about, it's a touchy subject for a lot of people, and you know, especially, I find it's especially tough for white people to talk about it.
Yeah.
And white cisgendered males, they're the hardest ones to talk about this subject because they're afraid of offending somebody. And lucky for me, I'm not 100% white. My dad's from Peru, and I'm a lot of times people will use that to say that that's a reason that they have some kind of authority on it. I don't pretend to be any kind of authority on this subject. I'm just a guy talking to you with my friend. He's going to speak Portuguese, I'm going to speak English. And what we say, if it's offensive, definitely wasn't intended to be. I don't intend to.
Exatamente.
But sometimes it gets interpreted the way it gets interpreted. So, yeah.
Claro. É um assunto de fato complicado. É um assunto de fato complicado. Muito bem colocado, Robert. Muito obrigado. E justamente essa semana parece que o assunto está mais... eu vou inventar uma palavra que é convulado. Eu não sei se é essa a palavra. Estou inventando uma palavra.
It just got kicked up a notch, didn't it? I mean, it really did get... Just in the recent last 24 hours.
Exatamente. O presidente Trump fez um comentário aí. Parece que as coisas...
He made our job easy to talk about it.
Eu não esperava por isso. Realmente não esperava. Na verdade, em agosto de 2017, ele já havia, em uma entrevista coletiva, comentado sobre o novo sistema de escolha de seleção de imigrantes, que seria o Race Act, né, que seria baseado no critério de se você sabe inglês, E se você paga taxas, se você é uma pessoa, em inglês nós chamamos de skilled worker,
Right. Technical.
exatamente, um trabalhador que tem algum tipo de conhecimento que possa trazer benefícios para o país. E eu entendo que isso, assim, do ponto de vista nacionalista, é muito bom, né? Você quer que o seu país seja um país mais forte, claro, naturalmente, né? Mas essa semana, segundo algumas informações, nós não podemos colocar palavras na boca do presidente Trump também, mas afirmam que ele fez um comentário muito negativo, que eu tenho vergonha de repetir as palavras aqui, então não vou repetir. Eu acho que é melhor eu não falar. Se você quiser, talvez você julga aí, você acha se pode. Será que podemos falar isso aqui?
Are you talking about the most recent?
Isso, o buraco de.
Oh yeah, so he called it the shitholes for those countries, and to be honest, if you understand the language, that is a pretty horrible thing to say about the countries. But if you're thinking about it in the context of how people have ever spoken to me about those countries, when I meet people from these countries in question, the way that they describe it to me when I'm living in the United States or living in Japan is quite similar. They use different words because their language is different, but they're using the same, we call it illocutionary force. The words are the same strength of negativity about these countries from the people who actually live there. And that, to me, is the most bothering part about this. You know, one thing for me, personally, Trump saying those kind of things is a bit odd because he comes from a wonderful, affluent, opulent lifestyle. And for anybody who lives in that, even regular United States might be considered a whole, is what they might say. So for me, I think of it as, it's strange for Trump to say it, but let's not say that nobody's ever described their country or another country as something that horrible. That's where I have a real hard time, really punishing Trump for that. I mean, it is embarrassing to have your head of state say something like that, but again, not my president.
Exatamente. Existe um certo eufemismo, né? Escondido aí quando as pessoas se referem a determinados países. Nesse caso, ele estava supostamente se referindo a alguns países da África, alguns países da América Central. Inclusive, ele fez um comentário de que preferiria pessoas da Noruega, ok? Prefiro pessoas da Noruega que venham para pessoas de outra. Mas muita gente fala que ele é racista. Eu já vi coisas que realmente me deixam assim, e parece que realmente dá-se a entender, mas também não queremos acusar ninguém, né? Não queremos acusar ninguém.
Well, no, I mean, I think what we're looking at, I agree with you, Yudi, that it's a lot of the language that he used is inflammatory, it's terrible, and again, we don't want to accuse people of those kind of things, but when you're in a position of power, and this is a friend of mine on Facebook, he for some reason he thinks I'm a Trump supporter, which I'm not. Just so everybody knows out there, I might say something, well, I understand why Trump did that, or I understand why a policy is a certain way. It does not mean that I support the president in the way that, as like a Trump supporter supports them. What I would say is, I am a person who's going to look at everything pragmatically and make a total decision on it based on the facts and the evidence. And sometimes those are going to lead me to defend Trump. In this case, I don't really have anything to defend him on. He obviously was very, didn't choose his words very carefully. I mean, he could have said the less opulent nations, the developing world. He could have even used something as silly as the third world. We don't, in polite conversation, we don't refer to countries that are developing as third world countries anymore in America. I hear this a lot of time from Brazilians. They're always talking about
terceiro mundo.
a third world country.
Yeah.
We don't say that so much in English nowadays. We say it's a developing nation.
Yeah.
And I find that as a very kind of difficult thing to say as well, because some of them aren't developing. Unfortunately, they're really not developing. They haven't developed at all. And there's certain places where they really don't develop quite a bit. And sometimes they're more developed in certain ways than
Talvez
the United
poderia
States
ser
is.
considerado já país desenvolvido.
Right, in certain ways they're more developed. Like I know that there's some countries in Africa that had better cell phone reception than they did other things, because of the infrastructure was built first in the in cell phone technology rather than it was built in standard regular telephone technology. So there's certain ways where you say one is developed or not, but that's yeah.
Amigo meu, recentemente, ele mora em Cambridge, Boston, ok? E ele comentou comigo, ele estava em Moçambique, na África, ok? E nós estávamos falando pela internet. Na verdade, a internet de Moçambique, acho que Moçambique, estava melhor do que a de Boston, para falar a verdade. Por mais incrível que pareça, estava melhor do que na casa dele, né? Então, assim, de fato, a estrutura, né, a infraestrutura é diferente. Mas, sim, esse assunto político, esse lado aí, não tem que tomar cuidado. No meu ponto de vista, eu acho que o presidente Trump, como presidente, está tentando fazer o melhor do que é do julgamento da pessoa dele, do time dele, da staff dele. Mas, sim, na posição que ele está, espera-se que se tenha mais cuidado como um adulto, como um presidente, como um representante de um Estado, né? Aliás, o Estado mais poderoso do mundo. Então, é de se esperar que se tenha um comportamento mais, uma pessoa que pense mais, né? Antes de falar. Ele é muito impulsivo, né?
I think that a lot of people think that he should speak like that. I'm actually happy that he speaks in the vernacular, the regular language, because one of the reasons that and this is where I will defend him on that, is I would prefer to have the media dislike somebody who's doing bad stuff and get called out on it than to have the person speak really beautiful language and then they never call them out on their bad, you know, their bad.
Sim.
When Trump does something bad, we all know about it, and that's awesome. It's great that we know about it, because when
você sabe o que ele
está
pensando.
Yeah, we know that it's bad, and it gets pushed out into the light. But when other presidents in the past and in other countries, the presidents, the media helps them out so much that they are able to do horrible things. You know, at the time, I'm sure a lot of people compare Trump to Hitler. Hitler's press was very much in favor of him in Germany. The press was very much in favor of Hitler during that time. And the ones that weren't, well, they were dead. He just
Exatamente.
Killed them.
Simplesmente se livrava
daquilo. So far as I know, there's not been any of that in the American press, because they've been very vigilant, and thank God that they are.
Bom, esse lado político é muito sensível também, é muito complicado, mas eu queria te perguntar o seguinte: o assunto de hoje é discriminação, e para nós brasileiros, discriminar e discriminar são coisas diferentes. Você sabe disso, né, Robert? Discriminar, discriminar.
Right. So the two definitions we have in English, we have discriminate, which is the kind of the preconceived ideas that you have about some person, and they're usually in a negative way. So the word in American English and in British English is very negative connotation. If you're discriminatory, that's not a good thing. But it also has the meaning of to distinguish between two things.
Tell apart.
Right, so there's that in Portuguese as well. If you'd like to explain that a little bit.
Sim, nós temos discriminar, que seria discriminar em si seria, na verdade, conseguir distinguir as coisas, né? Ao pé da letra. E discriminar também tem o sentido negativo, de tratar um determinado grupo de uma maneira tipicamente negativa. Mas também temos discriminar. Discriminar seria fazer com que algo não seja um crime. Por exemplo, eu vou discriminar a maconha, ok? Então não é mais um crime, ok? E você tem preconceito. Então tem quatro palavras que eu gostaria de deixar marcado aqui, ok? A primeira seria preconceito, a segunda seria a primeira seria estereótipo. Estereótipo. A segunda seria preconceito. Preconceito, ok? Exatamente. E a terceira palavra seria discriminar. E a quarta palavra é uma palavra um pouco que eu acabei de encontrar hoje para poder colocar nessa lista, que seria a palavra estigma. Ok? Quando alguém tem um determinado estigma, né? E às vezes as pessoas misturam, né, um pouquinho. Então, normalmente o conceito que eu tenho, né, a ideia que eu tenho, a definição que eu tenho é que às vezes você pode ter um preconceito, uma ideia formada na sua cabeça. Por exemplo, quando você vê uma pessoa com tatuagem, quando você vê uma pessoa com dreadlocks, quando você eu não sei como fala dreadlocks, tranças? Acho que tranças, né? É aquele Rastafari parecido, né? Ou quando você vê uma pessoa de um determinado grupo que não é o seu, você tem uma ideia pré-formada. Agora, se você não faz nada, é apenas um preconceito. Né? Você tem uma ideia sua, mas você não fez nada. No momento em que você extrapola essa barreira, no momento em que você faz algo ruim, você tem um ato discriminatório. Você está fazendo algo ruim para aquela pessoa, né? Algum comportamento seu.
So if we think about that, so in English you would have a stereotype, which would mean you have a preconceived idea about somebody with the stereotypes, and when you act on that in a way that is negative or even favorable to somebody because of that stereotype or because of that preconceived judgment, then you are crossing over the line into what we would call discrimination.
E o estereótipo, às vezes, é verdadeiro. O estereótipo, às vezes nem sempre é verdadeiro, né? Asiáticos dirigem mal, asiáticos são bons de matemática. Mas, às vezes, o estereótipo é verdadeiro, né? A ideia que você tem. Né? Então, estereótipo é um pouco mais leve de se usar. O estigma seria uma marca muito ruim que você carrega, né? Além do sentido religioso da palavra. Não estou falando do sentido religioso, ok? Estou falando do sentido puro da palavra estigma.
Right, so you have a stigma attached to certain person or group that they are like this because there's a lot of that culture that runs within a certain group of people. Like a good example of that might be the what's it called? They call the tiger moms, you know, for mothers, Asian mothers that are really on top of their.
Minha filha tem que tocar piano e tem que estudar muito,
Right.
Tiger moms.
And so they have this
Rob,
stigma
eu tenho uma pergunta para você, ok? Somos todos iguais?
No.
Não.
That's the funny thing. I actually really don't like it when people say they want equality because they're not. It's good to have equality under the law, of course. Are we all equal under the law? Yes, and thank God we are. But the problem that I find is people are mixing that word up with equality of outcome.
Sim, é importante separar isso.
Equality of value. And I will give you an example of myself. Am I equal now to who I was 20 years ago? No. 20 years ago, I didn't have the experience
Definitivamente
I have today.
não.
And there's also that point that it goes through. You know, that when we go through that process of growing up, are children more valuable than their parents? Well, in a way, yes, because their parents are closer to dead.
Yeah. Exatamente.
So, you know,
tem mais valor, né? Claro que é diferente,
Right.
né? Então, eu costumo falar assim, no que se trata dos direitos humanos, somos iguais. Como?
Right.
Né? Dentro dos direitos humanos, somos iguais. Mas culturalmente, claro que somos diferentes. Mesmo dentro do seu próprio povo, nós somos diferentes. Então, daí surge a raiz da discriminação, ok? A ideia que está entre todo o grupo humano. No Japão é extremamente acentuado essa ideia de, em japonês eles falam uchi soto, né? In group, you out group, assim, tipo us and them, né? Nós e eles.
Us and them. Well, it's like uchi is like your house.
Exatamente,
right? So
é minha casa,
house
né? Exatamente.
So
daí surge a mesma palavra, né? Então, eu acho que talvez, perdoe, mas se você tiver alguma coisa a acrescentar, por favor, diga, mas eu acho que daí surge, aí mora a origem da discriminação.
In-group preference.
Assim,
and this is not just Japanese people that have it.
Todos nós.
I feel it every time when I go to a Brazilian place and everybody says, "Hey, gringo."
Yeah, it's like, whoa.
You know, that is honest. I mean, what we can call that is like the new term in America. We call it microaggression.
Yeah.
You know, I could say that's a microaggression and get offended, or I could just own it and say, you know, that's who I am. You know, in a way, and then do the best to show them what kind of a person I am.
Exatamente.
And show my individual worth to whoever they are.
Em japonês, gaijin não é uma palavra negativa. Depende da conotação, né? Então, a mesma coisa, pessoal. Assim, não quer dizer, gaijin, não quer dizer que é ofensivo, ok? Você pode aceitar isso como ofensivo. Você pode aceitar como ofensivo, ok? Claro que depende do que tá na gaijin. Se falar assim, é ofensivo, né? Quando fala aquele, né, aquela, né, dito assim, dessa forma, é ofensivo. Não quero falar japonês para não misturar, mas depende do jeito que fala, ok? Depende do jeito que fala.
So living here in Japan, we have the stigma of being called a gaijin, and with that stigma comes a lot of what we might consider something of discrimination. And what I think I hear Yuri saying basically is that the word gaijin in and of itself, if you look at it just where the word is, it doesn't necessarily mean a discriminatory value to that word. But what it does have is if the person uses it in a way that is describing you negatively and with their connotation and their context, they say, gaijin dana, and they don't like it. Then it might be considered to be that. But if it also could be considered to be just a way of recognizing that you're not from Japan.
Agora, eu vou falar em japonês só um pouquinho. 自分で外人だよ。ね、俺外人だよ。そんなに構わない。né? Eu não me importo falar que eu sou gaijin. Mas se vier de uma pessoa vem, né, e fala de uma maneira ofensiva, claro que não é a palavra, é o comportamento que ofende, ok? Não é a palavra, é o comportamento, ok?
It's the words. One thing, one of my favorite comedians was George Carlin, and he used to say the words are innocent. It's the context that means everything.
Muito bem colocado. Portanto,
words themselves are innocent.
Podemos afirmar que não somos iguais culturalmente. Somos iguais dentro dos direitos humanos, né? E talvez a origem da discriminação é exatamente a ideia do meu grupo, o seu grupo. Eu não conheço o seu grupo. Porque talvez se você for pensar bem, Robert, há milhares de anos atrás, quando nós ainda éramos primitivos,
when we were hunter-gatherer societies.
Exatamente. Se você cruzasse a floresta e fosse para algum outro grupo, você corria o risco de morrer. Okay? Você poderia morrer ali. Okay?
You know,
Então,
I found it's very interesting because, you know, the humans didn't develop agriculture until just, you know, quite recently. When we think about the whole of humanity, the whole history of humanity, agriculture was the first step. And there is actually an island, I came to understand that there's an island off the coast of India that it has basically never had foreign, you know, people enter to the island. And the people there, if they see anybody
eu
on the
assisti
island,
isso. Eu assisti isso.
they will try to kill them.
Yeah.
Like, just like immediately just throw arrows at them. I mean, they're the most racist, most discriminatory people on the planet. And for that reason, we're leaving them alone.
Yeah, deixe eles ali, não mexe.
And
Okay?
I thought that was quite interesting because they will kill anybody who comes close to them.
Exatamente,
But we're
exatamente.
just leaving them alone. And partially because of that.
Sim, no Brasil também temos tribos que são altamente discriminatórias, ok? Se você for lá, você corre o risco de morrer também. Então, por motivos, por instinto, temos esse comportamento da discriminação, né? Só que como já, né, como pessoas civilizadas, tentamos superar isso, né? Tentamos através da educação, através da informação, né? Tentamos como que a gente pode fazer para poder resolver isso aí, ok? Bom, então falamos aí da origem, falamos do... Primeiro definimos, né? Falamos da origem. Eu tenho uma lista de coisas aqui que seria, que eu queria apontar para você. Deixa eu só puxar minha lista aqui. Onde é que está a minha lista? Eu tenho... Só um segundinho. Né? Yeah. Ok. Ok? People should not be... Ok? Assim, claro. Então, acima de tudo, as pessoas não devem ser escolhidas simplesmente por uma coisa que elas... As pessoas não devem ser tratadas simplesmente por um fator do qual elas não têm controle. Eu não tenho controle da minha nacionalidade ou da língua que eu falo. Então, as pessoas deveriam ser tratadas de uma forma geral ou pelo... primeiramente, acima de tudo, como ser humano, né? Mas também pelas qualidades da pessoa, né? Será que a pessoa consegue... né? Por exemplo, se você for contratar alguém como empregador, ok? Você não contrata baseado em nada mais além do que a capacidade da pessoa. Será que essa pessoa consegue resolver o que eu preciso de fazer? Então...
You're talking about basically you're going to hire somebody based entirely on their ability to do the job, not based on anything that they can't control. If you're basing your bias on stuff that the person cannot control about themselves, then you're basing that in a kind of a discriminatory way.
Sure.
But if you're basing it on how well the person can perform in that job, in all aspects of that job, then of course you have to make discriminatory ideas within that ambit, you know, within that the factors of the job. You should be discriminatory.
Claro,
one of the ways to do that is
certos itens você tem que tomar cuidado, né? Um cego não pode ser piloto, você tem que discriminar.
Right. Well, or for example, if you're doing the auditions for a basketball team, you know, you want the tallest, fastest, strongest,
é uma forma de discriminar. É uma forma de discriminar.
You know, there's certain people that would show up and they would be just really not physically fit enough to do it. In that case, you know, there's a discrimination there.
Então, o que nos traz a determinado ponto é quais são os tipos de discriminação que existem? Okay, quais os tipos de discriminação que existem?
This never ends. We could talk about every type of discriminatory thing. There are people that discriminate for everything at this point.
Tudo que é diferente pode ser discriminado, praticamente, né? Tudo que é diferente. Mas os mais comuns são a etnia, a raça, a religião, ser homem ou ser mulher, né? Se a pessoa... Na Índia, eu soube que tem a discriminação de castas, eu não consegui imaginar isso, ok? Existe também a discriminação da preferência sexual, que existe uma grande discussão em torno disso, que é uma coisa que eu quero falar também. E existe a discriminação, creio que eu já falei, da idade também, né? Da idade, entre outros fatores, né?
So if you're going over the kind of list of what the major themes for discrimination are, you know, between age discrimination, between gender discrimination, between racial discriminations, between all types of what is it called, sexual preference discrimination, and all those kind of things, which I think everybody that is, you know, can kind of universally, we condemn these, you know, as a educated society, all of these things are quite strongly condemned. I think that there's very few people that would argue in favor of, you know, any of those things that you mentioned, that we should be actively discriminating against that. I don't think that there's anybody actually arguing for that. What I think is the main problem is people are looking for ways to become, to use their identity as some kind of a wedge between other people. And I think that this is the problem that I really find, where they're getting offended. People in general are getting offended way too much over things that you know, people say or people do, when that is it's an easy thing for everybody logical to condemn, and anybody that's halfway, you know, honest will condemn those kind of things, and I don't think that there's anybody actually pushing for you know, for more of that. So that's where I think where it's interesting that we have to even talk about most of these, but we do, because people tend to bring them up.
É importante falar sobre isso porque você tenta procurar soluções, mas de fato o que você está falando é verdade. Algumas pessoas se vitimizam, né? Elas falam, nossa, eu estou sendo discriminado por isso e por aquilo. Não está tendo nada disso, né? Então tem que tomar cuidado, tem que filtrar bem o que está realmente acontecendo, né? Rob, você pode responder isso melhor do que eu. É uma pergunta da qual eu não encontrei uma resposta exata na internet. Mas
I hope I can do that.
Orientação sexual nos Estados Unidos hoje é protegida por lei no ambiente de trabalho?
That is I believe that it is protected by law, in the fact that cannot be a reason to terminate somebody's employment, specifically in the government job. I mean, really, in those ways. I remember when I was younger that there was a lot of that, you know, people that were that were gay or lesbian or LGBT community were discriminated against quite horrendously in the past. I believe that might still exist.
Você presenciou isso já?
Of course, because when I was
eu não consigo imaginar isso acontecendo nos Estados Unidos. Talvez eu sou inocente, mas eu não consigo imaginar.
The funny thing is, I don't think that, from my point of view, Brazil looks like it's the pillar of
tudo aberto, né? Tudo aberto.
Right. So that's an interesting thing that you think that America is a very
consigo imaginar.
And I thought Brazil was the same way as well, that they were a totally open society about that. But what is interesting, and I'll bring it to you where this is where I know that it still exists even today, is just the way that kids will say to another kid in school, oh, you know, he's gay.
Oh, that's so gay.
Like it's something that is
negative
connotation to it. And even you see this within kids that are like, I saw it as young as in the 4th grade. This was just about 4 years back, where I would see that, and it really shocked me, because I thought, well, I mean, that kind of culture is gone, but it really showed up. Wow, it is still alive. That people will
eu já escutei
think of it as a negative thing.
Eu já escutei You punch like a girl. Eu não sei se as crianças falam isso ainda, né?
Right.
Mas eu já escutei
But
essa
I'm
já.
sure they
Né?
do. I'm sure they do.
Punch
But
like a girl.
I find that to not be, and I mean, somebody's going to take this and say, oh, you know, this is a really sexist thing to say. But when somebody says you punch like a girl, it doesn't mean that all girls punch bad. I mean, you know, there are women that know how to punch. And I've been punched by women before, and I don't appreciate it. You know, that's the one thing I always fall on the side of like, don't ever punch me. You know, like
Será que a gente podemos
not even in the
conversar?
arm. You know, not even those kind of things. I don't accept it from anybody. But the thing when people say punch like a girl, that's a description of basically saying you don't know how to punch. And it's just as simple as this. If for people to change this this kind of discriminatory speech, you need to be more careful about not necessarily saying anything about you know, trying to trigger other people, but if you say you punch poorly, it's a much better description.
Por que não fala
of what's
assim,
going on.
né? É.
Right.
Eu tenho certeza que tem muitas meninas que se me derem um soco, eu saio correndo, ou eu choro né?
Yeah. I mean, we're not saying when you say that you punch like a, because that's kind of not the connotation that I understand of it. When people say you punch like girls, because you don't know how to punch. You know, they got this little, you know, this kind of, this is not a punch. This is a, they haven't studied any kind of martial arts. They haven't done any boxing. They don't know how to punch. So a man might be punching like a girl in the way that he doesn't know how to punch. That's the description way. So if you just said, look, your punching is terrible. you punch terribly. It's a much better way to get yourself out of the problem of using a negative connotation about the way a woman punches. When I can guarantee you that if Ronda Rousey gave you a punch, you would know it and you would not.
Estaria
you might
sangrando.
go out easily. So, yeah.
Mas no Brasil, a discriminação, principalmente essa discriminação de gênero, existe uma grande discussão sobre isso, principalmente do lado conservador, do lado cristão, de que não existe orientação sexual, existe apenas gênero, menino, menina, é só isso. E existem pessoas mais, não, existe sim, existe um grande leque de orientação sexual, né? de preferências, né? Mas, enfim, no Brasil isso existe. A discriminação ainda, eu poderia dizer que até uns 10 anos atrás, foi a última vez que estive no Brasil, eu sei que existe, mas existe de uma forma disfarçada. Pequenas brincadeiras, pequenos comentários, pequenas, assim, ainda parece, é como se a pessoa não for straight, se a pessoa não for hétero, se a pessoa não for hétero, ok? Se a pessoa não for hétero, ela é vista levemente como cidadão de segunda classe, ok? Ela é vista, principalmente os homens tratam os homossexuais, homens, né, os gays, não todos, tá? Não todos, por favor, não todos. Mas existe assim ainda uma cultura de tratar como cidadão de segunda classe. Infelizmente,
this is surprising to me. This is surprising to me in this day and age, because what I found is a lot of people, and one of the main things, this is the big thing. I think they're afraid of what they don't know and what they don't understand. And what people have to understand is, I before I met anybody who was gay, I might have had actually some kind of preconceived ideas and some judgmental kind of ideas. In fact, I'm sure that I did. But it all changed the minute I actually met somebody who was gay, who was openly gay, and you know, he's my friend, and I would still consider him a friend to this day. He was a very interesting person to talk to. We had a lot of conversations that were really interesting. He was very respectful of my sexual preferences, and he respected me in that way. And I thought, well, you know, I've never even thought about it, that somebody would be respectful of my sexual preferences, because we went to a party, he took me there, and I realized that I was in the vast minority
Okay.
of straight males at the party. And I thought of that as, that was really an interesting experience for me, to have him say, no, he's straight, but he's okay. And I thought that was really interesting, that he would say that, that I'm straight and that I'm okay. Because generally what somebody might say in another party is, my friend's gay, but he's okay.
Como assim?
Right? And I think it was interesting that he was so protective of me, which I thought was an interesting thing. You know. So, yeah.
Eu tenho um amigo que, talvez, não sei se isso é certo ou errado, mas ele fingia, ele ia nas baladas, nas festas gay, ele não falava que ele era gay, mas ele ia só para conhecer as meninas, porque as meninas iam lá e elas achavam que todo mundo era gay, e ele falava, eu não sou, sou o único aqui que não é. Então ele aproveitava da situação. Estava aproveitando da situação.
No, that wasn't what happened with me. There were no girls at this party.
Só gay,
so,
né?
Yeah, it was basically only men. And I think there was only 2 of us that were straight there.
Eu lembro da política do don't ask, como era?
Don't ask,
don't tell.
American military. Yeah.
Será que hoje em dia aceitam? Eu sei que no Brasil praticamente é melhor não falar, não perguntar.
Well, I don't know what the policy is right now in America. I think that under President Obama, he actually changed the law of American military, the don't ask, don't tell. That seems to me like a horrible way to deal with the problem. I also think that it's very strange that the American military would allow women in, and at the same time not allow gay men in and gay women in. It's very strange.
Qual a lógica? Qual a lógica?
Yeah, because on the side of the generals and the people, they know more about this than I do, but I would say, you know, from a point of view of logic, I mean, these are people who want to serve their country and go put themselves in harm's way for what their leadership has told them, and basically sell their lives to the cause of the country. I would never do that myself.
É o último sacrifício que alguém pode fazer.
Right. So for them to want to do that, and who am I to say no, you can't?
Exatamente. Lamentável, né?
Yeah, I think that's crazy that they wouldn't be able to be accepted as they are.
Eu encontrei uma lista de perguntas que são consideradas discriminatórias numa entrevista, ok?
Some discriminatory questions that you might end up hearing on an interview. Okay?
Como por exemplo, você é cidadão deste país?
That's possibly a discriminatory one. Okay, so are you a citizen of this country?
Você não precisa perguntar isso.
Yeah, in America, that's an interesting one. Question, because there is a lot of what we call them. They like to call themselves undocumented immigrants, and the truth is, you have a whole spectrum of from illegal immigrants to illegals. Sometimes what they were referred to, and sometimes they're referred to as undocumented.
Sim, tem os dreamers também, né?
They call it, dreamers. But I think in the case of the dreamers, these are children that are brought over by parents who have, decided that they don't want to follow due process. Which in the interesting thing about this, and I often tell people this, and there is no easy way to immigrate to the United States legally. The only legitimate or quasi-legitimate way to immigrate to the United States from South and Central America is illegally. It's almost impossible to legally immigrate to the United States. And I think that this is the tragedy of of the United States immigration policy. I don't agree with it in any way, shape, or form. And when I say that, a lot of people don't understand what I mean. But the reason why I can never agree with this system is it could be much easier to allow people who want to come to do a job or want to follow their dream to go to the United States to do it. But one of the problems that we have built within the American society is we've built what was called kind of a welfare state. And as long as you have a welfare state and...
sim, eles querem fazer uso do welfare, né?
Right. And so this is the problem. If you have a welfare state, a state that's providing a lot of things for its citizens, and some people want to come over and take advantage of that, it's a very difficult thing to do. Because where's the cutoff point? You're going to let in everybody? I mean, like everybody? This is a problem.
Quais seriam os direitos humanos? Quais seriam, por exemplo, saúde e educação? A pessoa poderia ter acesso mesmo sendo não documentada?
Well, that's the thing is for me, I personally don't believe that healthcare or education is a right. It's your personal responsibility to take care of yourself. I think that the big problem we have here is we're saying that the state's gonna give you this. Now, if you want to make a system and pay into the system and make sure that the system works and use that system, then I have no problem with that. Making a system of healthcare or making a system of education that people voluntarily can be a part of, and in that case, it shouldn't matter if the person comes from another country. If they pay into the system and they can prove that they are, then why not let them in? You know.
Basicamente, então você concorda que é melhor perguntar: você pode trabalhar neste país? Você tem documentação para trabalhar aqui? Do que perguntar se você é deste país ou se você mora neste país.
Right. So if you're asking the question for you in Japan, we need a MAI number and we also need a form of identification. In America, you need a social security number.
No Japão, as pessoas já te perguntaram inúmeras vezes: ô cunhado, tira desse cá, qual o seu país? Inúmeras vezes, né? E aqui não tem esse problema, né? Essa sensibilidade.
The interesting thing, and a lot of people want to understand this, and they need to understand this, Japan doesn't have an immigration problem. If anything, it's looking for ways to get more people to come into the country and do the job.
Precisamos de imigrantes.
Right.
Precisamos.
So the difference in America and Japan is Japan has a very simple and easily regulated immigration system that very few people can do illegally. There are illegal immigrants in Japan. They do exist. I've never met one that didn't have his papers in order.
A maioria entrou legalmente.
Right. Well, and even if they're here, it's impossible for you to get anywhere without your foreign registry card. You can't even get. I remember when I first came to this country as a tourist, we came to study on a regular passport, and we went to rent a video at a video rental store, and nobody could rent the video because none of us had. Yeah, we didn't have that. So if you want any kind of services, you want to sign up for anything at all, buy a car, do anything, you have to have those documents or people won't even sell you the goods. So this is a really big difference than, anything else. And hi, Wes, how you doing there? So I just shout out to one of my buddies I haven't seen in a long time.
Então, em uma entrevista de trabalho, por exemplo, uma outra pergunta, você perguntaria qual sua língua nativa, qual língua você fala, ou você perguntaria outra coisa?
Well, I think it's an interesting thing. I would just speak to them in the language that I was that the job was interviewing for, and if they couldn't respond, then I wouldn't have much to interview after that because
Ou você fala inglês ou não.
Right. do you speak English or not? And that might be considered in America these days. It might be considered a bit of discriminatory.
Pouco impolido, né? Impolido.
Yeah, some people might consider that discriminatory. I personally wouldn't, because I mean, if you're applying for the job, they're looking at what you can do. I've heard it lots of times being here in Japan. Can you speak Japanese? And then, of course, I've been speaking. Usually, when I walk in the door, I come in speaking Japanese. If I'm applying for a Japanese speaking
Você não tem
job.
escolha, você tem que falar.
Right, and the same is true when I go to a Brazilian, institution and try to work there. If I was to go in and just speak.
Se falam português com você, você fala português de volta.
Right, so that's my situation. A lot of people don't have the luxury to speak a lot of different languages, and when they don't, it is kind of offensive. I know a lot of people that if I'm speaking in the room and I'm speaking another language and they only speak one of the languages I speak, the first thing they'll do is they'll elbow me and say, "Speak this language," And I have a friend that I really love. His name is David, and he always would. If you told him to speak that language, then that was guaranteed he was never going to speak that language with you. But if you just spoke to him in a language, then he would maybe speak back to you in one or the other. But it was interesting the way he got through life over here. I hope we get him on an interview sometime.
It'd be awesome, yeah. Seria muito legal, muito interessante. Existe uma quantidade de perguntas que pode acontecer numa entrevista de trabalho no Japão que eu acho que não aconteceria nos Estados Unidos.
Oh yeah, there's so much. And actually I found that there's some questions. I mean, when I was interviewing people for a job in Japan, some things that I found that were certain cultures find really offensive, and actually that certain things are actually against the law. You can't even ask them. Is interesting. Like one time I was asking somebody, and I found out later that that's just not, you're not supposed to ask. It's a very big taboo. But I asked them what high school their kid was going to.
Sim,
and that was like a huge taboo.
Porque
and I thought,
define pouco assim a sua posição social de uma certa forma.
Right, and then another one, I was a kid had come in and they were going to take the English class, and I just said, "Oh, where does your dad work?" And that was another one. It was like a big taboo. You couldn't do that.
Eles consideram como perguntas pessoais.
Right, and so like there's a different kind of taboo we have in Japan than what we have in another country,
Já me perguntaram, por exemplo, em entrevista de trabalho, completamente irrelevante, a minha religião, né? Eu acho que por que querem saber? Eu falo, mas eu acho que era para saber se eu posso trabalhar determinados dias ou não sei, né?
Well, you know what was interesting for me? I was receiving the resumes from people from Singapore and from Malaysia and those countries, and they were actually putting on their resume their religion. It was like name, date of birth, religion, and I had never seen that or even thought about that.
Isso não pode aqui, não pode.
Right, I had never even seen that as something, but apparently in those countries that's a huge deal, because you can't work in certain areas because of your religion. Maybe it's difficult for you to work with certain people, or they want to be upfront about it and show those things out. Whereas I think in Western society, that's a personal part of your life, and you don't share it with somebody unless you really want to know. And it absolutely shouldn't have anything to do with what you do at work.
Trabalho, completamente pessoal. Outras, no Japão também, eu comparo o Japão porque nós moramos no Japão, então é a minha realidade. Mas duas coisas que todos nós estrangeiros aqui no Japão somos muito assim atentos, a qual somos muito atentos, é a idade e o gênero, ok? Porque você sabe que depois de certa idade, no Japão, é muito difícil você ser aceito em determinados trabalhos. E outro problema, o segundo problema, se você é mulher, perdão meninas, possivelmente você ganha menos do que um homem que faz a mesma coisa que você. Sim, existe a diferença.
In Japan we're finding, and this is the thing that everybody, it also depends on your industry, but in general, Japan has kind of an older, ideology on those things, and a not so, what would say, I find it an illogical ideology in that they will pay a woman less for the same work as a man, and in certain industries that is very apparent. And in fact, I've seen it where they work with age as well. They are paying somebody for the simple reason that the person is a certain age, they get a certain salary. And it is very interesting to me that they are able to do that. It's very illogical.
E ninguém todo mundo aceita. Todo mundo aceita.
And all Japanese accept it. In fact, they think it's a very
normal
humane and very nice thing. I mean, they have their reasons for it. This is the thing that you have to understand. They do have reasons for it. Like the reason number one why they do that.
Maternity license, maternity leave.
Right. Well, no, I don't think it's the maternity leave so much. But what they're thinking of is head of household has to raise his family.
Okay.
So
Setai.
Right. So a young couple, a young man who doesn't have children, he doesn't have as much salary. He doesn't get as much salary, even though he's doing the same job as a guy who's 35. Because the guy who's 35 supposedly has a couple of kids, so he has to take care of them. So his needs are different. So in the Japanese way, they're thinking about how to reach everybody's needs, but they're not looking at it in the detailed individual way. They're just looking at it by age and classifying people by age. What you have nowadays is people don't want to have kids because they know when they get 35, they're going to have a good salary going, and they don't have kids until they're 40 because that's when the big the big salary is going to come and hit them at 40, and then it's easier to have the kids. And that's a strange thing.
Certa vez eu perguntei para um empregador meu, japonês, por que as mulheres recebem menos? Por que as meninas ganham menos? Ele me disse que elas têm menos força, elas não podem trabalhar tanto, elas não produzem tanto. Eu acho que não é verdade. Eu acho que...
Well, I think...
Por exemplo, né? Se você é uma motorista de caminhão, se você dirige caminhão, ok? Você não precisa de ter força física. A tecnologia já superou a maioria desses problemas aí. Você pega um lift, né? Vai lá e coloca o produto lá no caminhão, fecha o caminhão e leva o caminhão. Você deveria ganhar do mesmo tanto que um motorista homem. Por que ganhar menos? E eu sei de casos que ganham menos. Eu já trabalhei do lado da minha esposa, fazendo praticamente o mesmo serviço, e ela ganhando menos. Ela ganhando, eu diria, 25% a menos do que eu, né? E às vezes eu ficava com dó, porque eu trabalhava menos do que ela. Ela trabalhava mais do que eu, ok? Honestamente, ela trabalhava mais do que eu. Mas eu sozinho não consigo mudar a lei. Mas pelo menos eu tô aqui falando, né? Pelo menos eu tô falando.
It's a great story that you just said there. Because what you're saying is there's jobs in Japan where you've got a driver, a truck driver, where the job itself doesn't require any more physical strength than any kind of to make a difference in that. The only difference would be the gender, and they're deciding to pay the woman less. And in your personal case, you were sure that you were working less, but your wife was getting paid less than you were, and you were getting paid more than her, and exactly the same kind of job. And I would say that this is really a horrible thing for those companies to do. But I also think that this happens not only to women in that, but it happens in certain industries. So we look at the school industry, and I've said this a lot of times, as teachers love being teachers so much
Que mesmo se
that
ganhar menos, vai fazer.
they'll take that terrible salary and they'll take that terrible salary every single time, and that's what actually makes it so that they don't get a better salary. If the teachers were to say, look, I'm not doing it for that price, you know, I love being a teacher a lot, but I'm not doing it for that price. You're going to have to pay me this much, or I'm not going to do it. You know, they would work a little more like a contractor that you know, than just accepting what they're given and saying, you know, I can't work for any more or less than this. And then when the push comes to shove, they say, well, I'm going to walk because I got to walk. And the problem we find is too many of the people in that profession are willing to take that low salary, and that's why it ends up in it. It's one of the hardest jobs there is. It can be, if you do it right. If you do it right, teaching is one of the hardest jobs there is. If you're in like a public school or you know, those kind of schools, if you're doing it wrong, well, there's a reason why everybody does it wrong. Is because they're not getting paid enough, and they say to themselves, "I'm not getting paid enough to do this horrible hard work." You know, I would prefer to go, and a lot of them do in Brazil or in Japan. A lot of the teachers that work in Brazilian schools, they go, well, I could do this job, which is a lot harder, a lot more stressful, or I could go work in the factory where it's just a tiny bit more hours.
Sim.
But I get paid like almost double what I'm getting paid.
Sim, mas é serviço que não traz nenhuma satisfação pessoal também, né?
And that's the thing. That's the difference. That's the thing. So if you look at it in its whole, but I think that's the thing is when women and men at the same time, that when they look at the jobs that they choose, that's got to be an important thing. But when they have chose the same job and they're doing the same thing and they get paid different, that's horrible.
Yeah.
And you just
Sim, acontece.
That's just a disgusting thing. You know, whenever I see that, I would get upset. So yeah.
Acontece. E às vezes simplesmente você não tem muito o que fazer a não ser. Você tem a opção, você pode sair do trabalho, você não aceita? Sai do trabalho. Tá? É uma opção que você tem. E tem uma série de outros problemas que são específicos do Japão. Né? Agora, tem uma lista de perguntas que são, eu falo que são perguntas que estão na área cinza, ok? Talvez você já tenha uma opinião muito formada em relação a isso, mas são as perguntas mais sensíveis que eu consegui encontrar, né? as mais problemáticas, ok? Por exemplo, será que tudo bem discriminar alguém que fuma?
Is it okay to discriminate against somebody who smokes? I don't know.
Eu honestamente, eu tenho uma visão a respeito de quem fuma. Eu amo todo mundo, ok? Deixa eu deixar bem claro. Mas eu não fumo, ok? Então, eu falo assim, eu não discrimino contra a pessoa que fuma, eu discrimino contra o cigarro. Não contra a pessoa que fuma.
You're saying you don't discriminate against the person who smokes, but the cigarettes themselves, you don't like them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think this is a thing that people really have to understand. If somebody smokes and you don't smoke, it's uncomfortable for the one who doesn't smoke. And I think that most people don't understand that. And it's not a point where they're gonna be upset with the other person smoking. They might just say, "Oh, that's fine. Go ahead and smoke your cigarettes." But the person generally, they feel a little bit uncomfortable with somebody who does smoke.
Você já fumou?
No, I've never smoked.
Eu também não.
You know, but the thing is, interesting thing for me is, there was a long time where I never drank. And I did not like to be around people who drank.
Okay.
So that was a thing that I also had. You know, it's like
discriminar contra quem bebe.
Yeah, I looked at it like the same thing, because when people get drunk, they kind of become idiots. You know, they're kind of like.
E faz mal para sua saúde e é perigoso. É perigoso. Né?
Yeah.
É perigoso.
And so what I would mean is it wasn't very fun to be around people who weren't able to you know,
Socializar,
properly.
socializar
Right.
sem álcool, né?
Right.
Socializar sem álcool.
And so, but I actually, you know, in recent years, when I came to Japan, everybody drank.
É verdade.
You didn't really have much of a choice.
Muita gente fuma no Japão também. Muita
it's
gente.
A lot of people that do smoke.
Ah.
But again, I've lived in a house with 5 people who chain smoked every day. You know, for a good portion of my youth, I was around smoking people. So I never really had that like thing where I looked really down at smoking, but I never smoked myself because I read the information. I heard things about smoking. I heard that it was bad for my lungs. Heard that it could make me get cancer, and so I didn't do it. I usually tell people when they smoke, I say, you know, it's probably going to kill you. They know that. It's not like it's a new thing to them. But if they're training to do, you know, some kind of sport, I usually tell them, you know, the first thing you want to do is give up smoking.
Cigarro, é.
But one thing I got to be honest, I was doing Mongolian bike challenge. It's a 900-kilometer race. I was in the last leg of it. Guy from Mongolia rides up. He's about the same level as I am. He pops out a cigarette, starts smoking it on his bike, and I just couldn't believe it.
Como que é possível?
I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it for the life of me. Yeah.
Discriminar contra pessoas obesas.
Right. So this is the argument of discriminating against fat people. I'm sorry, I used the wrong language there. That's an offensive term.
Em alguns casos, eu acho que assim, por exemplo, na minha busca, na minha pesquisa, eu vi algumas pessoas falando assim que se a pessoa tem um determinado tamanho, é normal que ela pague o dobro da passagem aérea.
Well, and I think that's not a discriminatory thing in the fact that the weight of an airplane actually makes a difference. I think it's pretty messed up, but if you look at this thing as well, children sometimes pay less because they're less they're less heavy. Should women pay less? Maybe they should.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a
Talvez
good,
você devesse pagar baseado no seu peso para todo mundo.
That might be an interesting way to solve the problem of having it. But I think what we're talking about normally is this idea of fat shaming, and there's 2 words that I like to think about here. We have body positive and we have fat shaming. These 2 sides of this problem. I after being somebody who was quite a bit heavier than what I am now, and after also being really quite thin and having people say, hey skinny guy, there's a bit that goes both ways, and I think that's one thing that we don't talk about enough is, you know, that people will just kind of, you know, be mean to the person who's thin because they're heavier, and when I was heavy or heavier, I was never really that big, but when I was heavier, I didn't worry about my weight. But when I started to worry about was my health. If you start worrying about your health, there's really no good way to be healthy and overweight. That's the difference.
Eu tenho 1,75 m e eu já cheguei a pesar 88 quilos, então eu era bem redondinho mesmo, ok? Eu era bem redondo mesmo. Eu lembro de deitar assim e ver a minha barriga cair de lado. Assim.
I was 120 kilograms almost at my peak, which is quite a bit more than what I am nowadays. I'm about 80 kilograms now, maybe 81, 82. Ideally, I should be right around 73.
Okay.
So that's the you know, the difference.
Saudável, né?
In the health that you have. But obesity is never healthiness, and let's just be clear about that. That's when people talk about being body positive, they're not trying to get you to be happy being obese. But I also don't think that they're fat shaming, because I think fat shaming is wrong. You know, when you really come after somebody because of their weight, you don't know.
Não está resolvendo nada dessa forma.
You're really not. But if you do say, you know, I was heavier and I'd like to help you, you know, if you really want to lose the weight, I've got some techniques. That's positive. You know, that's helpful.
Ok.
But, you know. Yeah.
Mais uma pergunta. Você alugaria uma casa para um ex-presidiário?
For an what are you talking?
Um presidiário, um ex-prisioneiro, um criminoso.
Okay.
Um
Somebody,
ex-criminoso.
an ex-convict. So an ex-convict. So
A
what's
felon,
the term you
né?
used? Yeah. What is the term you just used in Portuguese?
Ex-presidiário.
Ex-presidiário. Okay, so we would say an ex-convict in English. So or somebody who had been convicted of a felon, right? So convict means conviction in the court of law. Okay, would you rent a house to an ex-convict? This is interesting because I want to say
Ele já pagou o crime dele mediante a sociedade.
Well, let's say this though. We would have to know what the crime was. Okay?
Assassinato.
Right. Okay. So a murderer. Okay. So for me, in my book, yeah, those murderers, the ones that if they did a murder, they should probably still be in jail. But
É verdade. Muito bem colocado.
But the premise of it is somebody has reformed and not. This is something which is difficult for me to get into really.
Será que toda pessoa que aluga no Airbnb deveria dizer, por favor, me traga os seus antecedentes criminais? Não tem como, né?
Wow. Wow, that's interesting because Airbnb, you are bringing somebody into your home, right? I mean,
poderia ser um criminoso, poderia ser um assassino.
You have no idea. I mean, that's one of the things that everybody says. The one thing I can say is when we look at how many people are actual murderers these days is maybe quite a bit less than what, you know.
Alguns anos atrás, né?
Right. Well, then the idea of it is this. I would say that in general, that's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay. I have yet to meet.
Então você alugaria?
No, I take it back. I have met somebody who had killed somebody, and he was trying to change his life and be a better person.
Okay.
And it was an interesting thing. I met the guy. And I thought about this. It was interesting because if you told me that this guy had killed somebody before I met him, I would have really had a preconceived idea about the guy.
Preconceito, certo?
Right. But I met the guy, and then in the course of getting to know him, I found out that he had been to jail and that he had killed somebody. But I would have never been able to guess that.
Exatamente, você vai no tato, né? Você vai assim, o que eu sei dessa pessoa agora é isso. Eu vou ter que confiar e eu vou ter que dar um voto para essa pessoa, eu vou ter que dar um ponto para essa pessoa, até com que ela fale comigo, até com que ela, né? Acho que talvez.
I did live in a room share kind of environment with a guy who had been a convicted
criminoso, um ex-criminoso,
criminal, an ex-convict, and you know he was a fun guy to hang around with. He was just fine. He did steal.
Whoa!
So and he did end up going back to jail. Not for stealing from us, but from those things. So again,
eu já morei com uma pessoa que roubou de mim também. Infelizmente, não só de mim, da casa inteira, a pessoa roubou e fugiu. Acontece.
Né? Acontece. So it happens, right? And sometimes they're not ex-convicts. That's the thing.
Não. Essa pessoa não tinha passagem, né?
Right.
Não tinha passagem.
So at least I think at least in that case you kind of know what you're getting into, and you might be able to keep your things out of sight and out of mind, not make him get tempted by certain things.
Todo mundo merece uma chance até com que você fale, né? Todo mundo merece uma chance.
I don't know about that. That's a pretty big bold statement. When you say todo mundo, that says everybody. I would say, you know, you need to definitely keep your eyes open on those things. But I would say it's important that you take every situation and work on the individual level rather than the blanket, you know, the idea of preconceived ideas.
No Brasil, existe, assim, muitas pessoas, uma grande quantidade de pessoas que colocam no currículo que falam inglês, ou que falam espanhol, ou que falam outra língua, né? E alguns empregadores discriminam contra quem não fala. Será que o empregador poderia discriminar? Até que ponto? Eu acho que mesmo se a pessoa não irá usar aquilo no trabalho, se a pessoa não, se a pessoa somente falará uma língua, por que que o empregador vai discriminar? Por exemplo, assim, tem que ser bilíngue, deve ser bilíngue, apesar de que não vai usar,
Well,
mas
and
é uma característica que nós exigimos. Eu acho um pouco desnecessário.
I think that I'm gonna one up you on this one. I'm gonna do something a little bit you might not expect. I think that there's an absurdity of college graduate requirement for most jobs.
E não vão usar.
A lot of jobs.
Não estava esperando mesmo essa.
that they will you'll get the door to get your foot in the door. You have to have a college degree, and I would say that most of the jobs that I've done, and even though I studied what I have a certain degree of study that has been dedicated to language and learning language. I studied TSFL in college, and the truth of the matter is what I learned in college and what I actually have to do in the job, they're very, very different things. So did the college really prepare me for the job? No, but did it give me a little bit of an open door to have some college in there? Yeah, it's given me a little bit open door. So when what I think is employers, when they say that they want somebody who can speak a foreign language, what they're really saying is I want somebody smart.
Yeah, faz sentido.
They're not saying
aceitável.
that they want somebody who can really speak the language. And what they're saying with the university diploma as well is they're saying, I want somebody smart.
Faz sentido. Agora, essa justificativa faz muito mais sentido para mim, ok?
Right.
Eu não tinha pensado assim.
I think that's what they're asking for. I don't think that they're asking for
Se
somebody,
fala ou não,
especially if they don't need it. Especially if you don't need it. But one of the things that I heard it's true. I hope it's true. Again, it's one of those things that you kind of hear. Please somebody prove me wrong or set me straight on this. But I heard and I've seen documentation that said that if you learn a second language, that your IQ actually increases. And so
eu acredito porque eu falo inglês também.
Right. So
eu sou muito bias para estar falando assim. Né?
Right. So for me, I'm speaking about 4 languages fluently. If I throw in French, I got 5. But that means I'm just all those points of IQ that just.
Você é muito suspeito de estar falando, Robert. Não vale.
Right.
Okay?
Right. I heard this, and I hope it's true. I want, if somebody finds out that it's not, or that you can show me the data that it is true, great. If you don't have that data, please also show me.
Cadê o estudo, né? Sim.
Yeah.
Agora outra coisa, voltando no assunto do criminoso, você preferiria alugar para um criminoso a sua casa ou para um estudante?
A student?
Um estudante, normalmente, estudante não tem trabalho fixo, ok? Então, fica naquela.
Well, I mean, that's always the risk you run when you're running that kind of business, I guess. Let's put it into a context that I can understand a little better. Would I rather give an English class, prepare a course, an English course, for somebody who is educated or somebody who is not educated? So in that case, or let's say a criminal, okay? Or somebody
ex-criminoso, ex-convicto.
An ex-convict.
Talvez reformado, talvez não.
I would have zero problem taking their money if they were going to pay me to do it. I would have zero problem taking their money, and I would give them the best representation I could as far as you know, as a teacher teaching them the language that they were trying to learn. But I think in the case of inviting somebody into your house, that's a huge thing. I mean, you have kids, Yuri, right?
Não,
you have
eu
children,
alugaria
right?
para o estudante. Se ele não me
Right.
pagar, tudo bem. Criminoso,
Yeah.
eu fico com o pé atrás. Tá?
Yeah.
Perdão, é uma coisa que vai além do meu controle, esse sentimento, né?
Well, and I think that you'd be right, though, Yuri. I mean, this is the thing: is you have factors that you have to
considerar,
take into consideration. Right. You have to consider those things. You'd be a fool not to.
Yeah.
And this is the thing: when we talk about these situations, and one of the things that really upsets me about a lot of this talk about, for example, we're talking like let's really open this up, and we go to America and the immigrant ban on people from Muslim speaking, Muslim majority countries. One of the things that really upsets me about this, there's two things that upset me. One, that we have to have that kind of law anyway, but the way that it's attacked, and that people are saying, oh, you know, these people, they really need help. Well, these same people, if you ask them, well, how many will you like to take into your house? Some of these
Você pensaria duas vezes, né?
How many of them really want to take them in? This is the main thing. And a lot of this comes from the affluent people. Let's say the people with a lot of money.
Gera uma insegurança grande, eu entendo, né?
Right. It's a difficult thing for me to really push and say that somebody is racist for not wanting to take in more people into their country, because they might actually see them as competition for the resources in the country, and that's easy for people to paint them as the people who don't want them in, to say, oh, they're terrible. And I say this as an immigrant. I'm an immigrant.
Exatamente. Nós estamos aqui na mesma posição de imigrantes, né? Então.
When I come to Japan and live in this country, I recognize, first and foremost, I recognize every day that this is their country. They built it. This is their resources, and that you know, they allow.
Eles nos aceitaram aqui.
Yeah, I'm a guest in their country.
Então,
and even
se comporte tal como tal, né?
Right, I should at least try to obey the laws, and at least try to you know, give a little bit of homage to the culture. So this is one thing, and I've defended Japanese culture a lot of times when people have been able to just say that it's horrible and things like that. A lot of what we call Japan bashing.
Eu defendo muito, eu defendo muito.
And I always defend it. Because I understand that when you talk about the generalization of an entire people, you got to be really careful with that. To speak a generalization.
No nome de todos.
I don't like those things. I like to bring it on individual levels.
É sempre bom falar assim, olha, tem gente assim e tem gente assim, né?
There's, like they said, there's some of everything in the Lord's vineyards. One thing that they say in Spanish, hay de todo en el viña del Señor.
Boa, muito bem colocada.
But the point I want to make with this is, we have some people who want to paint Japanese people as racist, as such and such and such and such, but what they're not really focusing on is the individual. And I think you have to focus on the individuals. You cannot focus on the general population and say, was this individual's actions?
Ou de uma população inteira, né?
Right. Well, and are you going to you're going to throw everybody else's actions in the same sphere as that? We had a Japanese comedian a while back, and I defended him a little bit. I understand that what he did was offensive. I understand that it was offensive, but and I can understand where people would take offense to it. A Japanese comedian, he painted his face black.
Eu me lembro disso.
Which is, but it's not the first time that's happened in Japan. It happens a lot, actually. And I want to go into this just a brief bit, because it was something that was brought up, and I defended him to a point. because in Japan, they don't have the connotation so much of being particularly making fun of the other race by doing that. I don't think that they're doing that to make fun of black people. But they do make fun of black people. But what they usually use is an actual African. There's a comedian.
Tem o Bob, né?
Yeah, I can't stand that comedian.
Bob.
I can't. If I ever met him in face to face, I'd say, "Man, what are you doing?"
Eu não gosto porque eu acho ele muito.
I absolutely hate it because he is projecting this idea that Africans are inferior in their understanding of it, and he does it, and I can't imagine why he would do that.
Eu acho ele muito goofy, sabe, meio.
Yeah, he acts like an idiot, and I know he's not. I know he's not an idiot. I've never met the guy, but I can guarantee he's not an idiot. He acts completely stupid, and that image that he shows on the Japanese TV is way more offensive to me, you know, because of the caricature that he's presenting. It's kind of like, again, and you get this in America too, Asian actors that are acting really like...
assim, passando da conta, né?
Right, they're acting really Asian. We get the same thing with Mexican actors that are acting a certain way. And we get these kind of things. That's way more offensive to me than somebody painting themselves to look like Eddie Murphy.
Caricatura negativa daquilo, né?
Right. If they're painting themselves to look like Eddie Murphy from a movie with Eddie Murphy in it, with the intention to look like Eddie Murphy.
Indivíduo, não uma população.
Right. An individual. I find that less offensive than I find the other one. That's where I'm trying to get to.
Normalmente, às vezes que eu assisti esse Bob, os comentários que os japoneses fazem normalmente, kawaii, né? Não, kawaii. Mas na verdade, eles estão sendo educados, mas na verdade a imagem que passa não é boa, né? A imagem que passa de fato
it's not a good message. And I would confront him if I ever saw him. And also the guy he works with, Zane Kamyu, I would confront him also and say, how do you let this, how do you let this go? Because what it does is, Zane Kamyu is, for people who might not be familiar with him, he's a white guy living in Japan, and he's considered way intellectual in that combination of those guys working together. He's considered this huge intellectual guy, and he's always making fun of and making Bob, you know, making him the brunt of the joke every single time. And I look at that as a much more offensive way. If I ever talked to those guys in person, I would say, you know, what's up with that guy?
Em português nós falamos que ele está sendo complacente a uma coisa ruim, né? Ele está participando de uma coisa ruim. Ele está ajudando algo não muito bom, né? Sim, sim, existem uns problemas, como a gente já falou anteriormente, específicos do Japão. Só que tem tem um problema que é mundial, ok? Que é o seguinte, você contrataria alguém, simplesmente, você contrataria uma mulher, uma menina, uma moça, simplesmente por ela ser mais bonita?
Would that factor into why we would hire?
Contratar uma mulher pela aparência.
Right. Well, I think, you know, as much as I'd like to say that doesn't matter, I think that on myself, and I'm not saying I'm a really beautiful guy, but I'm saying that I feel like a lot of times I get the jobs that I get because of...
Você é muito bonito.
I mean, I'm sorry, but it's happened to me more times than not. You know,
isso é uma coisa boa para você,
well, you know, it is what it is. I didn't choose for them to hire me.
Isso é interessante.
If they're going to hire me because I got nice cheekbones, you know.
Tá valendo.
Okay, you know, I mean, what am I supposed to do? So the point is, like, again, we have the advantage of being beautiful, or we don't. That is the way I turn that question around. If you want me to answer specific to me, I think it does matter to certain industries.
Exatamente. Se você trabalha na recepção de uma clínica, se você trabalha como representante de uma marca, talvez beleza conte, né? Talvez beleza conte. Mas dependendo do trabalho, por exemplo, eu vou contratar, você tem exatamente 2 mulheres com as mesmas qualidades para serem contratadas como farmacêuticas, ok? Para uma determinada farmácia. Você olha, fala, essa aqui é mais bonita do que essa, então queira ou não. Eu acho que...
I would say, again, with that particular...
Ela não vai trabalhar na frente, ela vai trabalhar escondida lá atrás. Okay?
Right. Well, again, I look at it this way. That you're shooting a hypothetical out that I have never encountered in my experience. Okay. There's never been 2, and this is the thing I always say, there's never been 2 resumes in front of
exatamente
me
iguais, né?
that were equal, completely equal, and the deciding factor would be beautiful or not beautiful. I've never experienced that.
É verdade.
I don't think I will ever experience it. I have, however, had one resume that was superior to another.
Ah, sim, esteticamente.
Another that was no, the
conteúdo,
qualifications of the applicant was higher than the other applicants. And in my position, I pushed this applicant forward.
Mas tá justo, né?
Yeah, he had higher higher qualifications.
Justo.
What my employer told me, said, no, you can't hire him because he's black. And that actually happened to me in this country. And you want to know something? Here's the thing that I will say to you about this. This is what I said. That day, I updated my resume and I started applying for other jobs because there was no way I was going to work.
Trabalhar para alguém assim não dá.
Who would work that way. And I ended up saying to the guy, I said, look, this is the reason I can't do this. I can't personally work for you anymore.
Não dá,
because of that. And he didn't accept it well. He didn't accept it well. He wanted to say, no, man, it's not me. It's the system. It's Japan. It's this thing. I said, at the end of the day, I have my values, and I'm going to stand up for my values, which is I'm not going to
Você fez a coisa certa, com certeza.
Yeah. What surprised me, and I want to go into this just a bit more. What surprised me is that not other people in the company knew about it, and they didn't leave. And that's what it was. Again, everybody has their reasons, but I mean, at the time, I had 2 small children, you know, and
mesmo assim você ficou desempregado.
I made the decision to leave. And
muita coragem da sua parte, muita coragem.
Well, I don't think so. I don't think it was courageous on my part at all. I think it was the right thing to do. I couldn't live with myself otherwise. It was almost a selfish thing for me because at the same time, if I would have
eu confesso para você que talvez eu não trabalharia para essa pessoa. Mas eu não sei se eu teria coragem de fazer o que você fez, de imediatamente falar, olha, aqui não dá mais. Eu prepararia o terreno.
No. That's what I did. I didn't. This is where I would say I'm not as strong as you might think. I didn't stand up to him right in the moment and say that's it. I updated my resume. I sent out my resume away.
Sim.
I got a ping back. I got a ping back, and I left. I really feel like if I would have been a really big person, I would have said, no, that's it. I'm out of here today. That would have been a big person. I kind of, some days, and I look at myself and say, why wasn't I that strong? And again, but I did make the decision that day that I'm not working for him anymore. That decision did go in my mind.
Naquele exato momento, né?
Yeah, that was the moment that I decided to leave.
Agora, para defender um pouco sobre, de volta no assunto de julgar ou contratar alguém baseado na aparência, no caso a gente está falando de uma mulher, né, se ela é bonita ou não, não se sinta tão culpado, porque eu vi um estudo no qual a mesma mulher aplicou para várias empresas diferentes e no resumê ela usou uma roupa mais decotada, um corte mais aberto, né? E a maioria, no resumê, que ela demonstrava um pouco mais de pele, ela teve uma chamada bem maior do que no resumê, no qual ela aparecia vestida mais discreta, né? Então, existe isso sim, tá? Existe isso sim. Ó. Alguns empregadores olham simplesmente porque ainda a maioria dos empregadores são homens, né? Ainda. E eles acabam julgando, né, eu gostei mais dessa aqui. Mas não vou dizer para você sem pensar. Eu acho que pensam sim. Eu acho que pensam sim. Né?
I believe 100% what you're saying, Yudi, and I believe in what you just said there, that the beautiful people usually get the jobs. Yeah. And I'm guilty of this. I'm sorry. I have a nice.
Você já teve o serviço. Foi contratado por ser bonito.
I've got all my hair. You know, I don't. I'm not saying, for me, for ages, I didn't think I was a really good-looking person. For ages, I didn't believe that. But then I realized that my resume is not as strong as maybe some other candidates are. But there's a certain amount of charm and charisma
que conta muito.
That you have to bring, and it counts a lot. It counts a lot to whatever it is. And so when you present yourself better, you're going to do better. Again, I would see this with the same thing with males. We'd have the male resumes come in, and if the male looked like he was kind of a nerd or kind of a geek, sometimes that would factor into my self. President and other things. What do we judge them on? Well, do they look presidential? It's something that they actually say. You know, that's why they wear the clothes they do and that. So it's
a
all
aparência,
part of it.
né? Tanto é que no Japão as pessoas pedem para você ter uma boa aparência, assim, se vestir bem na hora da entrevista, né? Você ter um.
In Japan, you have to have a picture of you on your resume. That's
tem que ter a foto.
Right, you gotta have a picture of the person on the resume.
Você tem que estar, né? Existe assim um código já meio formatado.
Oh yeah, and they judge your handwriting, they judge your everything. So you know, it's all judged.
O jeito que você fala, o jeito que você escreve, o seu cabelo, né? Então, sim, no Japão discrimina muito esse aspecto, não vou negar não. Né? Agora, em relação ainda segurando um pouco nas meninas, né? Mas certos estabelecimentos, como por exemplo restaurantes e bares, contratam apenas meninas. Isso também não é discriminar? Poderia contratar misturado?
I find that they will hire a man if they need the position to be filled. They will hire men. In the case of this, I want to put this one back at you. In the case of schools and their pedagogues, how many male pedagogues do you see?
Verdade, a maioria é mulher.
They're all women.
É verdade.
And when you get to the high school, it's a lot of men. You know.
Verdade, verdade.
And the way I see it is
na primeira fase é uma coisa mais maternal, né?
I think that's the perception of the people. Because I'm a Montessori teacher. That's what I work to teach.
Eu preciso de estudar mais isso.
I'm a 3 to 6 year old teacher. I want to teach people from 3 to 6. I don't want to teach necessarily in a school setting anybody older than 6, because what happens after 6 is they've lost all creativity. If by the time I get them, so what I like to do is to teach them when they're creative and foster the creativity. But I don't see that.
Ensinar eles a segurar essa criatividade também, né?
Right. But I think I've been discriminated against more times than I can count on that level. I've sent in a lot of applications when I was trying to get into a Montessori school, and it was not easy at all. Nobody wanted to accept.
Você se acha uma pessoa, eu me acho bem liberal, mas você se acha uma pessoa mais de direita ou de esquerda ou de balanceada?
Well, I think that there's my political theory is anarchism. Does that make sense?
Okay.
I'm a political anarchist in that sense.
Okay.
So I don't find that to be particularly in line with leftist ideology or the conservative ideology. Yeah. So,
então, você na verdade não faz parte de nada disso, né?
Well, yeah, I mean, I discuss politics a lot.
Você contrataria alguém baseado na filiação política dessa pessoa? Você acha que, por exemplo, se a pessoa tem uma determinada filiação política, isso poderia... essa pessoa não vai ser muito boa nesse ambiente aqui? Ou você acha que tem que ter mais diversidade?
I think that that the idea of diversity as a strength means not diversity of colors of skin as much as is diversity of thought that I appreciate. And I can say this with surety. I value my friends that are on the left and I value my friends that are on the right.
Pela opinião deles, né? É muito importante.
Well, because sometimes, let me put it to you this way. Sometimes I learn more from people who I disagree with.
Nossa, muito bem colocado, Robert.
This is the truth of the matter. I might not agree with somebody on their political ideology, but then I have the chance to show what my political ideology is, and that they have the ability to explain what their political ideology is, and I can learn from it. So for me, the diversity of thought is the one kind of diversity that I find really lacking in education. I don't see very many people from what we would say the right in education, and I don't see.
Você acha que você comentou?
I don't see a good exception. I don't see the left wingers accepting right wingers in the field of education.
Verdade.
And this is a problem. If you're openly right wing, let's say, for example, I imagine if you're a Trump supporter in California and you're applying for jobs at private schools,
você
I think you're going to have a really hard time
ficar prejudicado.
to get a job there.
Sim.
I think even myself as an anarchist, which would say that I don't agree in any form of government as ethical, because I find it to be a kind of a tyranny over humanity. But I'm vastly against Trump because
Ou seja, você prefere um governo, você prefere uma administração mais localizada. O grupo se organiza, não o governo.
Well, I think that if there is going to be leadership, you should have it voluntary leadership, and that basically, if in the way that I see it, if somebody doesn't have, if I don't have the right to kill somebody, neither does somebody have the right to kill me. So the way I see it is nobody has the right to kill anybody, especially anybody who's innocent. I mean,
então eu posso afirmar com certeza, você não discrimina ninguém baseado na filiação política da pessoa. Você não discrimina ninguém. Você aceita todos os pontos de vista.
Yeah, I mean, you really can't. The idea of discriminating against somebody for any reason at all as a preconceived discrimination, there are reasons why you would, but I can say that the majority of the ones that we talked about today, the big ones that people seem to worry about, those are the ones
são
that
justificáveis.
Those are not justifiable. There's a justifiable discrimination. For example, and I will give you an example.
É esse que eu estou interessado. Quando é assim aceitável?
I will give you a really great way to discriminate if you really want to. Okay, let's say my boss, the one that I talked about before. I decided I wasn't going to work for him. Why? Because of his actions. So I discriminated against him because of his actions.
Justificável, faz sentido.
Right. So this is the way I find that discrimination is important. One thing that we find again.
Tá mais como julgamento do que discriminação, né?
Yeah, you have to make the choices that the people who you interact with should be people that you can, that one, that are going to benefit your life. They're going to give some kind of benefit for you. And not in the say that you need to be like, I'm going to profit, I'm going to get all kinds of wealth from this. No, that they complement.
Que aumentam, né? Trazem, melhoram a sua vida em qualquer aspecto, né?
Yes, they improve your life in some way, and you improve theirs, and together you improve each other.
Hey, você está
people,
improving a minha vida com as suas opiniões. Muito obrigado.
You too, you know. I mean, that's the point. But I think that people they want to find a reason not to. That's a problem.
Ok. Agora, uma pergunta que talvez você já tenha visto por aí. Uma situação, uma discussão que você já tenha visto por aí. Não sei se isso trata-se de discriminação, mas com certeza as mães, a maioria das mães conhecem essa situação, que é amamentar em público. Algumas pessoas dizem que
breastfeeding in public.
É discriminação você dizer que não pode?
Oh, when they're told that they're not able to. I was not aware that this was even a thing.
Amamentar em público é discriminar? Seria a pergunta. Será?
So telling people they cannot breastfeed in public, would that be considered discrimination? I would definitely say that's a form of discrimination.
No Japão é impensável, né?
Yeah, and it's also something I would think is crazy. Again, as an anarchist, I think that this is something that you cannot really legislate. You sure as heck don't want to make some laws about it. That's the worst thing that you can possibly do.
A pessoa tem o direito, né? Não está fazendo nada de errado.
Well, I mean, it's natural. Like, for the love of God. I mean,
e você sabe que no Japão as pessoas não fazem isso, né? Você sabe que no Japão as pessoas não
fazem. Yeah, but they do. I've seen it.
Estrangeiros? Estrangeiros?
No, Japanese people.
Nossa.
Real
em público?
People. In public.
Nossa.
Yes, I've seen it. But the thing is, Japanese are extremely discreet.
Às vezes coloca a toalha, né, em cima.
They cover,
coloca a toalha, é verdade.
Você já viu. And I can appreciate the discreetness. Why not be discreet?
Eu acho que a preocupação é maior dos homens do que das mulheres. Vamos falar a verdade. Porque às vezes, por exemplo, você vai você está com seus amigos, ok? E aí tem a esposa do teu amigo, né? E ela começa a amamentar ali na sua frente. E você é amigo do esposo dela. Então você não quer causar constrangimento pro marido, mas você não... Eu não me importo. Mas você fica pensando assim, ai meu Deus, ele vai achar que eu tô olhando, né? Então, às vezes a preocupação é mais dos homens do que das mulheres. Não é?
Right.
Não!
Right. Well, the thing about that, and I would say that my experience with women breastfeeding in public, when I lived in Panama, which I lived there for a brief period, this is one thing I can kind of understand where you're coming from, Yuri. Because there would be times when there was nothing, just as simple as pull out the breast.
Sim, amamenta em qualquer lugar mesmo, né?
And let the baby eat. And I think that the one thing that it was a bit shocking for me, because in America we don't see that very often.
E eu não tô lembrado de ver ninguém amamentando em público nos Estados Unidos.
There wasn't a lot of that. But I would.
Mas talvez hoje em dia tenha mais, não sei, né? Talvez hoje em dia tenha mais.
Well, I'm in total favor of making that a bit more liberated. I mean, of course, young people are kind of like, maybe who have been in kind of a sheltered culture. They can't really handle that. But after living in Panama, it's nothing. It's nothing that.
É natural.
Plus, I would say, I mean, with regard to that, I mean, anybody who's had a degree of sexual knowledge, you know, realizes there's a big difference between, you know.
Posso falar? Vou falar uma coisa aqui, meninas. Eu sei que eu não deveria estar falando isso na internet, né? Mas eu tenho um filho, naturalmente minha esposa amamentou durante um bom tempo. Mas eu, como assim, não sei te dizer o porquê, mas eu tenho medo de leite materno. Sabe? Não me encosta leite materno! Sabe? Eu tenho um certo medo, assim. Então, não sei porquê.
I think it's getting late, Yudi. I think we need to go to bed.
Tá começando a ficar a conversa estranha.
I think your mind's kind of wandering.
Tá começando a ficar estranho.
But for me, again, it's not a big deal. I mean, it really is.
Eu não beberia, tá? Eu não beberia, eu vou colocar. Não, muito obrigado. Muito obrigado.
How do you know? But you drink cow's milk, right?
Eu tento não beber. Mas quando não tem outra coisa, eu bebo.
Okay, right.
Eu tento não beber. Mas eu bebi muito já, tá? Até hoje, né? Quando não tem, é o que tem mesmo. Mas, porque eu não sei, é materno.
For anybody out there who's not understanding why Yudi is over there blushing, he's talking about, you know, drinking mother's milk as opposed. You know, that he has a certain fear of that.
Yeah.
And I actually knew a guy, I'm not going to say his name, but I knew a guy who told me straight up, he says, I love that stuff.
No!
I know a guy who told me that.
No.
For me, it's neither here nor there. It's, you know, it's not something I put a lot of thought to.
Não quero.
No. Bom, all right, I think it's
só para poder fechar, ok? Por que é importante falar sobre discriminação? Porque eu acho que principalmente assim, para evitar a discussão, para evitar o problema, para evitar as brigas, em alguns casos, para evitar suicídio também, ok? Algumas pessoas acabam se matando porque sofrem discriminação e tal. Eu acho que se você falar, se você expor isso aí, talvez a sua vida melhore. Essa é a importância de estar falando, né?
Right. I'm going to say that one thing I would believe is this: it is really important to keep one thing in mind. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. That's what we say in English. And this is my argument for why every side should listen to everybody else's argument. It doesn't mean that we're going to change our opinion or we're going to change our mind over or our philosophy or a central way of thinking. But we need to be open-minded to what we hear. And when the arguments don't hold up, they need to be shot down. And this is when the arguments are wrong, they need to be given a bit more credence. So one of the things that I find is there are no really good logical arguments in most, most reasons for being a discriminatory person. So when you bring these ideas up, when you talk about them in an open forum, and I'm not talking about in something of a safe space. I'm thinking about to get the really dirty, horrible arguments out there, and see how ridiculous they are. Then people can move forward and say, yeah, those are ridiculous arguments. They don't hold any water, and that they are in fact something you want to avoid. Until you've had those arguments, you are stuck with preconceito. You're stuck with preconceived ideas because that's all you have.
Você está escondido na caverna.
You only have the narrow form of thought that was presented to you.
E aí mora a raiz da discriminação, né? Em japonês eles falam inonaka no kaeru, o sapo dentro da fossa, né? O sapo dentro do buraco não conhece o mar, né? Por favor, traduza para mim, ok? Por favor. Como superar a discriminação?
How to get over discrimination, or how to overpower discrimination.
Ser seguro de si mesmo.
Be sure of yourself.
2, evitar coisas negativas, ambientes negativos, né?
So number 2, get out of the negative spaces.
3, reconhecer os seus pontos fracos.
the number 3 is know your own personal weaknesses.
4, procurar ajuda.
And number 4 is look for help or find help.
6, na pior das circunstâncias, denuncie.
In the worst of circumstances, denounce.
Denúncia, procure a lei, né? Procure a lei.
Look for the law to help you out.
E procure outros para com que você possa contar a sua história e talvez ajudar eles também.
And look for others that have similar stories, and they can maybe help you out.
Sim, existem inúmeras histórias aí dentro da comunidade brasileira que algumas pessoas clamam ter sofrido discriminação, mas eu acho que é tudo caso a caso, não é bem assim, tem que tomar muito cuidado, ok?
Yeah, I think that the idea, there's one thing I would be sure of, in the case of Brazilians being discriminated against, and a lot of people feel this way, and I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why that foreigners in general are discriminated against. It's the same reason that a lot of people are discriminated against in America as well. Number 1, learning the language of the people that are around you is
Aprender a
very
língua.
important.
Sim.
Because there's nothing more, nothing that separates people more than a language barrier.
Sim. Eu posso dizer para você, as pessoas, eu já senti assim, às vezes, isso que você está falando é muito importante, porque às vezes eu sinto que, assim, eu vou em determinado lugar, eles sabem que eu sou estrangeiro, inicialmente ficam um pouco assim com o pé atrás, mas quando sabem que você fala, o tratamento é outro, ok? Então,
they're so worried. It's very common, man. People, they're so worried, and this happens to me all the time. Like I will go in to teach a class to Brazilians that I don't know, and I will speak to them in pure English for the first couple minutes, and they are so nervous and
ficam
so
defensivos,
worried.
né?
And I've had people even get upset at me. Because I speak Portuguese, and I could have easily just come in and talked with them in Portuguese from the first beginning, and the difference is night and day. One thing that Americans always say, this is what they always say, French people are so mean and so
Eu já escutei isso.
They're jerks. And I have never met a French person that I thought was a jerk. Never once. You know what has happened every time when I meet a French person, I speak to, I say, I might say to them, well, where are you from? When I see them on the train or something, and they'll say, I'm from France, and immediately, vous êtes français, c'est très bien. I would start speaking to them in French, and they're the coolest people ever. They're the coolest people ever. They're always like, wow, you speak some French. And we're just become friends almost instantly.
Se
and
conecta.
the same with Japanese people. When I'll see some old guy, he's kind of like looking at the floor, and I'll say, Ohayou gozaimasu, say something, just a smile thing. He'll lighten up. He'll give me
quebra-gelo. Quebra-gelo.
Yeah, he'll speak. He'll start talking to me. Everything changes, on the train. Sometimes nobody will sit by me, and then I'll see somebody standing up and say, "Dozo swate kudasai," and they're happy as hey. They'll sit right down once I just offer them a seat, but they're just afraid. They're just a little bit. They're just afraid. Will I be able to talk to this guy? What's going to be happening? So you have to break the ice. You have to be the stronger person. When I say
você é o visitante, você é o estranho.
Yeah. Right. And I would say the same thing in America. What happened every time, this had happened all the time. I would go and if I went and talked to the Mexican people, they're the greatest people ever. Why? I speak their language. And if they would come to me and speak to me in English or speak to the regular people in English, my dad looks like the typical Latin American. He's as brown as can be. And he'd just go up to people they're sitting in the park, and he'd say, "Hey guys, how's it going?" And he'd just start talking to them. And they never treated him with any kind of
Respondem
disrespect.
naturalmente, né?
They were just as happy. "Oh, well, where are you from?" And he'd say, "I'm from Peru." And then they'd say, "Oh, well, where's Peru?" And they get all these questions, and he'd answer all the questions, and before they know it, they'd be talking about whatever they were interested in, and they would never have any problems. So the one thing I would say, you know, and this is the thing, my father learned English by just doing that. Just going up and talking to people. Just going up and talking to people.
Bem natural mesmo.
Right. So the thing is, if you can, if you have that personality, go out and just talk to the people.
Isso é bom para os extrovertidos, é muito bom, né?
I mean, that's how I learned Portuguese, to be honest. I mean, I just went up to Brazilians and started trying to speak to them, you know.
Você fala muito bem, Robert. Você fala muito
That's how
bem.
I learned how to speak it. So, yeah.
Eu já ouvi dizer que diz que quando você fala com alguém na segunda língua dela, você fala com a cabeça da pessoa. E quando você fala com a pessoa na primeira língua dela, você fala com o coração. Então tem a ver com o que você está falando, né? Você acaba fazendo a pessoa se sentir muito confortável. E eu me sinto muito confortável falando aqui, por estar falando português, minha língua materna, né? E você, né, com certeza gastou anos para poder aprender, mas graças a isso a gente pode se comunicar naturalmente, tanto você em inglês quanto eu em português, para todos que estão nos assistindo. Não usamos nada para traduzir não, tá? Bom, Robert, eu já te segurei muito hoje, é porque a conversa é infinita, mas eu fico ansioso por esse momento, eu gosto bastante, ok? Muito obrigado, pessoal, que nos assistiu hoje, ok? Eventualmente, nós estaremos publicando esses episódios em formato de podcast também. O nome será o mesmo, Kicking Ideas, ok? E também estará disponível no YouTube e em outras plataformas também, ok?
Like and share.
Like and share. Espero que tenhamos ajudado alguém de alguma forma. Rob, I'll leave you here. Eu te deixo aqui.
Bye-bye.
Ok?
We'll see you. Good night.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye, guys. Thanks. Bye.